Okay, in this video, we're going to be covering the upcoming matchup between the Florida Gators and the Kentucky Wildcats. This has been a matchup that for a long time was dominated by the Gators for over 30 years. There was a one part in this series where there was a 31-year matchup, 31-year winning streak that Florida had over the Kentucky Wildcats. I think it was from like 86 to 2000, 2017, yes. Um, Over the last few years of that streak, particularly 2014, starting off there, Kentucky had come close to beating Florida in this matchup several times before they go on this recent hot streak that they've gotten series-wise. 2014, they went to triple overtime in which Florida barely escaped that victory. This one, the next year, 2015, Florida was on the road. They won 14-9. One touchdown drive. I remember one touchdown. I remember it was a quick two play 5 yard drive because there was a interception by I believe it was Vernon Hargraves in 2015, and he returned it all the way inside the Kentucky 5 before he was tackled and almost had to pick six. And then Florida scored another touchdown drive, but that game for the most part was kind of dominated stats wise by Kentucky, but they just made a few too many key mistakes that didn't allow them to close out that allow Florida to close out the victory. A couple years later, 2017, Kentucky lost on a game-losing, basically busted coverage where Florida was lined up inside their 10-yard line, and there was a receiver for Florida. I don't remember his name. I think it might have been Trayvon Grimes. He was left wide open by one of the Kentucky players because by the Kentucky defense because nobody lined up out opposite side of him. And by the time they had realized that the play had already snapped, so the receiver for Florida caught the touchdown pass as a Kentucky player was making his late adjustment to him. And then finally the dam broke and the floods came in and Kentucky beat Florida the next year, mostly because of bad quarterback play by Felipe Franks in that game, and they broke the streak in Gainesville, and they were on the verge of making it two in a row in Florida in 2019. The next year, they were up 21-10 when Felipe Franks got hurt, and then Kyle Trask came in, and us Florida fans know that the rest is history, not just in that game, but throughout Kyle Trask's tenure at Florida. He came in and gave Florida one of the best uh, gave Florida a great performance, helped Florida come back to win the game in the second half when they were down by 21-10, and then Florida won the game, I think, scoring unanswered 20 points in that second half, 30-21. And the next year, Florida blew out Kentucky, and then the last couple of years, Kentucky has gotten the best of Florida, beating Florida in 2021. There was some bad turnovers that Florida had in that game. I think they turned the ball over like two or three times, one of which was a blocked field goal that Kentucky returned for a touchdown. Then very next year, it felt like Florida was kind of like dominating the game, but they made too many key mistakes. Anthony Richardson threw two terrible interceptions that were converted into Kentucky touchdowns. So that was 14 points awarded there. Florida just made too many mistakes in that game that they could have for them to overcome and get a victory over Kentucky. So Kentucky right now feels like they are kind of like in control of this series, which for over 30 years at one point felt like that was a statement that could never be said. So this year, Florida's on the road to Kentucky. They're on a three-game winning streak right now. After losing to Utah, they had a very below average performance, especially by my expectations against Charlotte last Saturday. I expected Florida to win by 4 touchdowns in that game. Well, the defense played well, which they have basically throughout every single game that they've played this year. Even in the Utah loss, I don't think you could really blame that game on Utah. It was more so bad pass protection by the offensive line and bad mistakes by special teams that kind of cost Florida in that game. More so as the defense, like the defense kind of kept them in for the most part. Um, then you have the McNeese State game. I mean, FCS school, but still an opponent nonetheless. Gave up only 7 points. Can completely just bully Tennessee at the line of scrimmage in that game. To giving up only 16 points, and then last week against Charlotte, they only gave up 7 points again. So say what you want, but in 3 out of 4 football games, they've given up 16 points or less, and that's still something to be commended for the Gators defense when you consider last year they gave up almost 30 to USF last year. So big improvement for Florida wise on the defensive side of the ball. Kentucky is right now is a little bit better than what I thought they were going to be in the summer. They're 4-0 right now. As you can see, ESPN probability has Kentucky at a 52.1% chance of winning. They have Devin Leary, who is a transfer from North Carolina State, one of the more respected quarterbacks of the ACC over the last few years. They also have Ryan Davis, who's a really good running back for them. Devin Leary has thrown way more interceptions than what I thought he would, considering through 4 games of the year. It's kind of nice to see that Graham Mertz has actually done a better job taking care of the football. He only has 1 interception. I think maybe only one other fumble loss, so only maybe 2 giveaways through 4 games. During this time at Wisconsin, ball security was kind of an issue with Graham Mertz, so it seems like he's kind of cleaned that up this year. Completion percentage for Graham Mertz is way higher than it is for Leary. More interceptions for Leary, but of course, more passing yards and more passing touchdowns for Devin Leary. He is a. I don't have a problem saying this. He's a better quarterback than Graham Mertz, and that's just the way it is. I mean, bigger, stronger arm, played more of a prototype offense at North Carolina State, and transferring to Kentucky, he fit very well with what they're trying to do on the offensive side of the ball. You know, it's just he's just a real good quarterback. And right now, here's the team stats. Florida, this is going to be more Florida versus Kentucky is going to be more of a defensive matchup, in my opinion. Um, Here's the last 5 victories for Kentucky, flat 5 games, excuse me, for Kentucky. Lost to Iowa in the bowl game last year, but we're not really going to cover them too much. Last week had a good victory against Vanderbilt, 45-28. I remember one of the points they scored was a pick six. I don't remember the defender's name, but one of their defenders had a pick six against Vanderbilt. But the fact that Vanderbilt put up 28 points on Kentucky should give Florida some confidence that maybe they can move the ball on the Kentucky defense. So it should be a pretty interesting matchup. Florida is on a 3-game win streak, like I said. This is going to be a defensive matchup. As I stated before, passing yards allowed for Florida 162.8, Kentucky 215.8. And that's saying something because if you look at Kentucky's schedule, they've only faced one Power 5 opponent, and that was Vanderbilt. The other 3 games was against Arkansas. No, not Arkansas. Not Arkansas, excuse me. It was Akron. Akron. Sorry, the letters confused me. Arkansas is ARK, Akron is AKR. And before them was Eastern Kentucky, and before them was Ball State. So the fact that Kentucky facing those 4 opponents has given up almost 300 yards per game, considered while Florida on the other hand has faced 2 Power 5 opponents and have only given up just less than 250 yards per game. That right there tells me that in terms of buying stock on whose defense, you put more stock in Florida's defense than you would Kentucky's, because the competition that Florida has faced is way more strenuous than the competition Kentucky has faced. I mean, Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, while Florida played Utah and Tennessee in their first 3 games. So I think that Florida's defense is a little bit more battle tested. Both teams love to run the football. Florida obviously has their share of running backs in Travis Etienne and Montrell Johnson, and Kentucky has Ryan Davis. They both are averaging over 130 yards per game. Kentucky 135 and a half. Florida almost a $165. A lot of that was kind of a lot of those numbers were kind of inflated by their performances against McNeese and Tennessee. So, and the rushing defense for both of these teams is very stingy. 82.3 for Florida, 77.5 for Kentucky. It should be a very interesting matchup. If what you want to do if you're Florida, if you kind of want to date back to the Utah game because this is going to be your first true road game since the Utah game. You want to take that crowd noise out of it. It's going to be noon. Going to be noon at 12 o'clock on ESPN. Kentucky fans, if the Florida fans, I don't think us Florida fans really consider Kentucky to be a rival, but Kentucky fans definitely consider Florida to be a rival. With how Florida, kind of rub their nose, us Florida fans are kind of rub their noses in the fact that we had a 30-year win streak, 30-plus-year win streak on Kentucky, and now they finally have gotten the upper hand. I've won 3 of the last 5 against the Gators. Kentucky fans are always going to be always going to be ready to just come into their stadium and see Kentucky beat Florida, which is something that they've done quite impressively over the last few years. And another thing that I think one thing that works out for Florida is that instead of it being a 7 o'clock game, is that they're facing Kentucky at noon. See, beforehand, Kentucky usually would have Florida late in the evening. 2015, 2017, and 2021 was an example of that, and 2019 as well. And those late evening games for Florida, for some reason, were always a pain in the neck for them to try to win on the road to Kentucky. So it's going to be a fun matchup, seeing Florida versus Kentucky. I have tremendous respect for what Mark Stoops has done for that program. You know, they were very unwatchable before he came along, and he's made them into a very respectable program that Florida fans now can look and see them on the schedule and go like, ooh, is this gonna be a victory instead of just check marking as an automatic victory like we did in the past. So it's gonna be a good matchup. I think I had Florida winning this game back in the summer, but Kentucky looks like they're a better football team than what I had imagined. But I'm gonna stick with my summer prediction of Florida going on the road and beating Kentucky. I think it's gonna be a tough matchup, but I don't think it's an undoable matchup. And I can see Florida going into Lexington and walking out with a victory. So go Gators.